Hello, I am John Clay here again on RANTBOX TV, that rare beast that offers nuanced commentary on race, gender, and other community concerns in 21st century Britain and abroad. We are subject driven, and so we'll avoid the risk of spending 15 to 20 minutes introducing the entire panel. They can introduce themselves as they go on, and you can find out more about them when the video comes to an end. If you're watching this, well, the full length version on YouTube, click like and hit subscribe to get more of the upload that I'm hoping that you enjoy. Today's question is, how has the idea of the superhero benefited fictional media? And what is the case for its negative impact on modern content? We're going to do various subheadings. The first heading is the place of comics in current pop culture.
Okay, well, I'll come out of the nerd closet on this one first. So it's a tough call because that actually is a really strange subject now, more than ever, because in some respects, obviously, I think the perception is that everyone assumes that we're in the sort of second or possibly third golden age of comics now, like actual printed comics, paper ones that you hold in your hand. But actually, not so much. It's a very hard thing. I mean, I was looking at a Forbes thing from about, I don't know, October 2019, earlier today when we were talking about this. And obviously the sense is that at that point, everyone was stepping away from superheroes in comic books. Everyone's kind of left it behind. They're not really feeling it. And the question was on superhero fatigue, or is it the movies, or is it the what? But to be honest, from a perspective of someone who actually still reads the things, and who grew up with the things, I feel like with this superhero stuff, maybe it's just gotten a bit too convoluted. You know, like where you have DC, who have to restart their continuity once every many years. You've now restarted it like 4 times in 2 decades or something ridiculous. And then you've got Marvel, who just pretend that continuity doesn't happen and just shuffle things around as and when they feel like. And I think to try and attract new readers to that is impossible. Because even for someone like me, who's like steeped in it, I'm like, I really can't be bothered to chase up on this stuff. You know, I can't find it. And the only stuff now, the superhero stuff that I really love, the stuff I really engage with, is from the slightly weirder writers, people like Matt Fraction's run on Hawkeye, which is more like a sort of art house thing, and sort of Warren Ellis's stuff, which is slightly left field, and sort of slightly weirder takes on things, which I guess is, you know, spinning back to where we've talked about The Boys before, and Garth Ennis and Alan Moore and all the weird guys who deconstruct stuff. I think the adults who come to this now, who are the only ones with a disposable income, want to read weird things, interesting things. Yeah. They don't want to be up to their eyeballs in continuity going, who the heck is this guy? And what happened here? And what are they talking about? Why is Captain America wearing green now? What the heck?
Yeah, there has been quite... it's been going for some time, but essentially the biggest argument is that if you've got this whole convoluted story that's been happening since the late 30s for some of these stories, Superman, Batman, notably, how do you get new readers involved? I know from my own standpoint that if I'm to go into a newsagent, there's less of a chance of me seeing an English reprint of an American comic book as I used to do when I was a kid. It's not there. These comic books are in Forbidden Planet and specialist stores, which is seen as like, you know, we're going there next month, you know, you'd say to your kids, if at all, if that was the culture in your family. And I don't necessarily think that's the best way to get new readers involved, because there's less of a chance than chancing by those comic books in the grocery store or a newsagent. But I've got quite a bit to say. I want to hear what everyone else has to say. Has comic books in some way been negatively or positively been reinforced by the superhero boom? Anyone else?
I don't necessarily think they've been reinforced in any way. I think in the most cases, because obviously you've had the Marvel movies and then the DC movies, it's really just focused on your trinities, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and then you have your Marvel guys, and of course you had the original Spider-Mans and so forth, and they still sell ridiculously well relatively. But when you do introduce a newer character who isn't as well known, and especially hasn't, and even if they do have like a TV show, for example, someone like Legion, or I don't know, the Mighty Squirrel Girl, who's due to have a new comic coming out in the next new film coming out in the next couple of years. And she's very interesting. She's the only person who defeated Thanos with squirrels. Amazing. Her comic still doesn't really sell. And you have the likes of She-Hulk. Her comic doesn't sell because people are still sort of attracted to what they see on the big screen. That's how I see it.
I want to say something about She-Hulk. Boring as fucking. I play Marvel Puzzle Quest, and so that's how I know most of these characters, because I don't actually. Fucking hell, She-Hulk. What is the point? I just really boring as shit.
There's a fun thing about that with the She-Hulk bit that's kind of interesting, is that when it started out, it was boring on purpose. There's one thing which is never really talked about, which is the fact that there was a point under the Comics Code Authority, so I'm really going too far with this, where actually female characters weren't allowed to technically have their own books, as superhero books. Women weren't allowed to commit acts of violence. I think that's right. Don't quote me on that. But that's why women are always in teams like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, and you know, Wonder Woman's a bit of an outlier. But they always had to be associated with something that already existed, because it was frowned upon. So She-Hulk was a way of trying to include girls at the start, but it had to be kind of lame. But then later on, she's a lawyer, and there's a whole lot of other stuff. It's actually,
and she gets freaky. She gets she gets about. She's a juggernaut. Oh my god.
Yeah.
She gets freaky. It's well known in the industry that she was the forefront of the sexual revolution for a lot of women, of that idea of empowerment and sorry, I'll allow you to talk about that later, obviously, but yeah.
I don't know, but when was what do you mean sexual revolution? Was it She-Hulk 60s? I know very little about She-Hulk.
Maybe Ollie might know more, someone else, but I think it was more the sort of the late 90s 2000 run when she was sort of reintroduced. And essentially she didn't actually revert back to her human form, even though she could, but she preferred to stay the 7 foot tall lawyer, super strong, super powerful, who could rock with Juggernaut when she wanted to. And essentially a lot of women took that on board and went, yeah, I'm going to the gym and I'm going to go do that as well. So it was kind of one of those things that got really pushed.
Interesting. Simon, can you tell us more about that when we get to the section?
Yeah, of course.
Does anyone have anything else to say regarding how the comic book culture, its place in our popular culture, has it been negatively or positively influenced by the superhero boom? I've got a bit to say, but I'd want to open it up first. No?
I think if nothing else, one thing I was going to add is that, you're talking about print and how the lack of like newsstand availability makes it hard to sell to kids, the kind of impulse buy. And that is absolutely true. Speaking for myself, I've moved on to reading digitally through like iPad and stuff like that. And even that, like, it's impossible to, my one critique of like Comixology, which is now part of Amazon, which I use, there are other outlets available, is that it's just an absolute cluster bomb. Like, trying to find anything is super difficult. They make it so disorganized.
Why?
It's just like sandpapering your own face off. I don't know why. I feel like there's a better way to do it. I feel like
because comics are hard.
Comics are hard. Exactly.
You're
like, this could, obviously there's that element where you've got a story going across like 3 or 4 different books, and like you don't know which one to look at, and maybe it's not curated. I don't know, but yeah, that has been an interesting thing. But I find that interesting, like you say, that you can't, it's hard to bring in the younger readers, because when I was a kid, it was like I would go to Forbidden Planet with my dad and go, oh, that one, you can't really do that now,
It does feel a bit like comics started off, well, I mean, it did start off for a younger audience, and now it's kind of evolved into basically an art form. They're like a lot of the really good comics are kind of like art books. They are they become very dense and convoluted in their storylines, and I feel like they become a victim of churn then, where because the cycle has to keep going, it's just really difficult to get into, and because of that, it's kind of outgrown the audience that it was designed for, because a little kid doesn't care about 10 years of lore to get you know, today's comic.
I'd
It's
say
int-
Alan Moore would agree with you that kids are being left behind in that way. I'd also say that in a strange way, if pop culture has fetishized certain moments in the history and feels that it can categorize it and move on, that has actually had a knock-on effect. Think about it. You've got Alan Moore, you've got Frank Miller, and you've got Neil Gaiman, and then you've got various other people who we as comic book nerds or geeks, however you want to call it, are aware of, but The Guardian or The Sun isn't necessarily going to do a piece on. If The Sun ever did a piece on Alan Moore, it would be because he's just very strange looking and he's got connections to a franchise that you've heard of. But point being is that for pop culture in a large format, it thinks it's read Watchmen, it thinks it understood The Dark Knight. So why does it need to revisit it as a format to promote it, to, you know, to create larger copy? You know, it's not really going to shift more copy if you have one of those aforementioned people on it, unless those people did something new that in some way inspired a franchise. Do you know what I mean? So that in itself is strange. I'll go on.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things I was going to say about movies and how they interplay is because the movies, you've got a much shorter period of time, and you have to get across the essence of the character, the essence that everyone knows, then traps the characters in the comic book in this sort of very small bubble of what they can and can't be. Particularly is, I obliquely said about Captain America wearing green. When Captain America went full Hydra for a bit, there was like an almost guttural reaction to that. Like it went very badly. And things like that. You can't do anything interesting because you're sort of tied down by the what the films will allow you to do, which I find kind of fascinating sometimes.
However, that piece is so influential within the comic books industry that I think one of the ideas that they're thinking about for Chris Evans' return is to pose that line, "Hail Hydra," in sort of like a what if or something like that. So there are so many threads that we can potentially explore from the older comics that weren't actually touched upon within the original runs of these more general pop culture, you know, or media pieces as well. But I don't necessarily know if there's going to be that much interest as well, because some of these, as you said, you know, if we take it apart, you know, Alan Moore, Game and so forth, they're pretty much the Nolans of their industry, auteurs, you would say, and they complete full coverage of what they're doing. You know, they work with their illustrators, script and so forth, inkers, and then put out masterpieces. But actually to read them, oh my God, you know, it's so difficult to sometimes get your head around some of the concepts, because Watchmen to me initially wasn't that interesting. I was probably about 11, 12, and I was like, this isn't fun. This is just about communism. I don't know. But it's taken me much now to really get around it. And I didn't even really watch the TV show because it didn't have that effect on me.
Okay.
Man, the TV show was great. Sorry.
Well, yeah.
Right. Okay. We'll definitely move on to TV and film very shortly. In closing, I want to say, and this could be only an experience that I've had and a few of my friends have had because of our age, but if you bought a comic back in the day, it would be at tops maybe, like, say, £3. Yeah. Now, single issue comics are a lot more expensive. And that could be where, because there's two sides of it. Some people are saying the comics book industry is dying, and some people are saying that it's actually doing fine, don't worry. But I'd say both sides agree that single issue formats are on the way out, because 29 or so pages, 5 of them being advertising for games and other comics, and it being about £5 doesn't make sense, right? If you're a kid of, like, say, between 10 and 15, there's only so much your pocket money is going to do. You'd rather get a trade paperback, as in the one sold in Forbidden Planet or Waterstone. So that whole part of the culture, I think, is dying, and the movies aren't necessarily helping it, unless you guys know anyone who saw Iron Man and said, hey, I'm going to a comic book shop. Does anybody know anyone that discovered comic books through films?
I mean,
And maybe know a few who tried, but then never pulled it off.
And we know why. It's not written for them.
I feel,
Sorry.
I feel like we're also like it's what you're saying there is very interesting. Sorry, I wanted to make this final point because I think it's relevant and kind of leads into the next section.
Yes.
I feel like one of the things that comics specifically has to deal with is the death of print and how you adapt to a new era that brings that same excitement that print media had. Because, you know, you bring up the idea of the price now, which is for a very concrete and real reason, which is nobody's buying magazine, like print media, as much these days. And so if comics are going to compete with film, they need to find a way to either make people buy the physical artifact for a reason, similar to with music. You know, you were not buying CDs. How do you switch up the format, get people to read when it's actually somewhat harder now than just sending them to YouTube or Netflix or whatever?
I had a crazy idea based on what you just said, and you guys are either going to laugh at me or you're going to run off and you're going to use this idea for your own nefarious ends. It begins with me stipulating this. Do you guys know that Keanu Reeves has his own comic?
No.
Okay.
No.
Hold that in
Is
mind.
it Bill and Ted's Bad Adventures? Sorry.
No. But my point being is that if you get a star, let's say Keanu Reeves or Brad Pitt, and have them and being an executive producer to a comic book, not only that, but have them being announced on all social media and on billboards as being, say, the new Batman. Keanu Reeves is the new Batman, only in the comics. That's going to make people go to it. This is only half of the idea. The other half is that you get someone good to fucking write it, because it's not that they haven't had these ideas before. When they say, hey, Iron Man, let's get him like to look a little bit like Robert Downey Jr. in the comics, doesn't make sales go up because it's got no crossover. If you get Robert Downey Jr. to actually have a share in doing that, then great. Otherwise, we're waiting for someone like, say, Samuel L. Jackson, once like the comic books industry actually really goes into a really shit place, waiting for him to do a Bob Geldof and try and save it. And that might not happen.
I mean, like, I've got Robert Downey Jr.'s image. Like, I'm playing Marvel Puzzle Quest, and when Iron Man appears sweating in the game when he's about to die, it's Robert Downey Jr.'s face that appears on there. And you know, anyone watched the other Marvel thing, Runaways?
Yes.
Yeah. So the Japanese Nico, that's the image of Nico, and Quake is the image of what's her face from the other. Yeah, Nick Fury is Samuel Jackson with it.
Yeah.
And Agent Coulson. Those are the people. They're not. I don't know what they used to look like, but they're the actors in the Puzzle Quest online.
It's very much like a religion, isn't it? And over time, as a religion gets older, then new faces become representative of the certain people within it. You know, but before this becomes a whole Jesus was black, let's go into another part of this thing. So how has the idea of superheroes benefited fiction in media? And we're looking at now the subheading of the film industry. Anyone?
Well, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about the film industry. I think it's very interesting, that idea of how we kind of feel like we're in this transition period where comics started off dictating films, and now it seems like films are dictating comics, you know. And I find it very interesting, especially because films are like prohibitively expensive to make. They are, out of all the areas we're sort of talking about, they are, you know, millions and millions of dollars to get these things made. Like they're not cheap. And in a way, actually, I wonder if sort of the decline of comics in a way maybe isn't so bad for it, because it kind of feels like now it's entering this kind of art house area where the only things that are going to stay and have longevity are the things that have real passion put into them, because the money's not in it to do anything else apart from, I guess, you know, kind of Pulp Fiction. Whereas on the other hand, with film, what you've got are these ridiculous, huge productions where, once again, similar to the music industry as well, there's a lot of reticence to put money down on a film that is not going to sell product, basically.
I just have a question, Matt. Do you think film is more important or TV? Because I think TV has probably has a lot more staying power than film, because you can develop an arc. I find, you every 3 years you'll get one film, whereas the television you'll get you could really get into it. And do you think maybe TV actually is influencing comics more than, say, either film? Or, like, which one of those two has got more power on changing
For sure.
the other one?
I think you raised a really good point, one that I was actually thinking of mentioning myself, which is that, yes, I think at the moment, I feel like film is kind of at the zenith, it's kind of risen, it's kind of at the top. And I think TV is coming in now and starting there. And the reason I say, well, the thing is, we're still in this situation now where streaming services are at loggerheads with one another. We kind of have this console wars thing going on, where if you don't have Amazon Prime, or you don't have Netflix, or you don't have whatever, then you don't end up seeing Series X, and you kind of get locked in by your media as a service provider to a specific channel of entertainment media. Whereas it's a more understood generality that when a film comes out, it's everywhere. And you can go to the cinema, well, you could go to the cinema and see a film on the day it came out.
I'm a little, I'm not, like, for real geeks out there, you don't need to buy Netflix or Amazon. They're soul seek.
Of course, no.
And you can get a hold of, and I just think the format of television is far more powerful than film. In fact, I think film and comics are dying out a little bit, because who goes to, especially during a pandemic, who's going to the cinema now, man? So
tell me about it.
Who knows if it's really going to recover? But TV, who's been watching lockdown stuff now, right?
No,
Think about
lockdown. I mean, of course, and that's kind of why I think that TV is in the ascendancy and taking over film. I do feel like film has had the top position, and as I said, it's kind of, I feel like it's either at the top or starting to dip at the moment, because we're still in this point at the moment where, like, there are a lot of insanely good TV shows out there, and as you say, they allow you to develop a storyline a lot more. And it's another thing that I think is very interesting about the relationship between films and comics, is that films, as Simon was saying, kind of have this, they kind of crystallize a character on a specific moment in time. And if we're talking about Ollie, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Ollie. But yeah, they crystallize a character in a certain moment of time, a certain kind of collective memory. And I feel like that very nature kind of contributes even more in film to the kind of the grind, the slush, the kind of reinvention. Like you say, that comics have reinvented themselves a certain amount of time. We've had Spider-Man rebooted, 3 times already in a space of like a decade or so. Like, it's ridiculous. And it's kind of why I feel like at the time, film was in a great position to conquer everything, because visual media is very appealing. Everyone goes to the cinema. It was in a time when streaming services weren't all that great. And Marvel positioned themselves really well to create this multi-platform, all-conquering like MCU. And the reason I feel like we are at the top of this peak right now is basically because of the MCU. And we are now in the position where, we are getting to that kind of burnout phase where people are losing interest. It's like, I haven't seen, you'll hate me for this, I haven't seen the second Endgame yet, because I just, like, there were other things for me to do. Which is crazy.
So wait, you got all the way through and then didn't watch the end?
Yeah, I know, right?
Oh my god! Oh my god, that's like eating like a meal and just like, no, I don't want dessert.
I mean, it felt a little bit like that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. You were full. You didn't want dessert. It's all good.
I mean, one day I'll feel like dessert. I will have that dessert. That's why I haven't yet. And I do think it's because of this fact that, you know, film has to be this big investment. And so because of that, it's not very mobile. It's even worse in terms of like being able to come up with new IPs. People are really risk averse. And so you're stuck reinventing Spider-Man 6-7 times, you know, like.
I'm keen to know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing.
Go on, Simon. I want to know if anyone else.
So I was just going to say, one thing I do love is. Yeah, just to say, one thing I do love, obviously with Disney being the behemoth that they are, and you've got like WB as well, but you've got obviously Deadpool, like a character like that, who obviously being formed in the comics, being of a particular shtick, R-rated, horrible, you know, breaking the fourth wall, has been he had the freedom on the Fox platform to essentially carry that on, and they got its 18 rating here, R rating in the US, and Disney deliberated for about 2-3 years during the acquisition to say, are we going to make Deadpool 3? And the fans asked for it, but Disney weren't sure if they were going to destroy their bottom line, because you can't make a Deadpool film at 15. There is no point. There's nothing there. But now they've actually relented and they said, no, you know what, we'll put it out as an 18 in the cinemas, but we'll also put it on, I think it's Hulu or one of the other platforms. And this is what we're finding, is that you are getting some of your cinema releases, but you're also getting your digital release on the same day. And they're just really trying to cover their boxes, cover their platforms to say, if you want to watch it anywhere, you can watch it anywhere as long as you stick with us. And they're hoping that people don't jump off the platform like myself. I watch the Avengers movies and then I don't touch Disney Plus for another couple of weeks until the next Marvel thing turns up. So,
okay, so we're talking about the proliferation of superhero media and how it can be done in superhero films. But I'd like to know from anyone if they think it's been a negative or positive experience for the form itself. I could say one triggering word: Scorsese. Anyone want to run with that?
Funnily enough, you know what? I for some God knows unknown reason, when I was doing a little bit of reading around earlier, I was watching Paul Joseph Watson's commentary called The Infantilization of Popular Culture, in which he whines like a little bitch for about 10 minutes about that very thing, and just basically uses Scorsese and Alan Moore exclusively as ways to say, everything's terrible, people are mature, I'm great, you suck. But honestly, all I was thinking was watching this is, nah, dude, this whole thing, I think it's improved. I think it's helped things. I don't think it's made cinema more artistic. Let me put it that way, but it's definitely helped. I mean, there was a time, funny enough, what I was going to chime in with earlier is when we were saying, you know, with Matt and Ola, when they were saying about like film and TV and how they, you know, will they one take over the other? There's a cultural part there where, at least in America, film is the highest form of art. I think Stephen King maybe says that at some stage in a book somewhere, where he's just like, you know, like, no matter what I do, no matter how good, I could write the best book ever, it would sell more than any other book, and they'd still ask me if I could make a film out of it because it would be better. You know what I mean?
If Stephen King said it, it must be true. Yeah.
Well, Stephen King's had so many terrible films.
Yeah.
He has some. There were some really great films. Okay, Christine. All right, that didn't work out.
The Mist was good. The Mist was very good. But yeah, all I'm saying is that, like, to draw more people into film, even if the superhero movies aren't great, at least they draw people in to take that thing. They bring them back into the cinema, which is a place they wouldn't have been. They keep that whole thing running. And, you know, like you were saying, with lockdown, there's no cinemas. For me, that's really sucked. It has been a very sucky year. Mm-hmm. And when Warner put out Wonder Woman on streaming, I was like, oh, come on, like, really? Like, of all the stuff you could do, you know, like, I literally risked my ass to go and watch Tenet in the movie theater to try and keep the whole thing running, and you just drop that on me? No, that sucks, man. Come on.
Does anyone else agree with Ollie that it's actually good for film in regards to the superhero boom? Not that I'm trying to cause an argument. I'm just getting a bigger picture here.
I
agree with
think yeah.
I
think film is much better because of the superhero stuff. I think it is a positive thing overall, you know.
There's a
I
certain
think
level.
not film in general, but blockbuster film. Because like blockbusters used to be kind of shit. And at least with these superhero things, they're not shit like they used to be. You know, like I don't know, like Jaws or I'm not, you know, all that Indiana.
But they are
Jones.
becoming really formulaic.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm getting it. I know exactly what's going to happen in them. I mean, this is why something like Civil War was brilliant, and the genre movies are more interesting to me than the big crash bang boom films all the time, because I just think that the directors have more freedom to sort of put their spin on it and say, I want to tell a spy story, or I want to tell a horror, like New Mutants, for example, which isn't that great, but at least it's a horror movie, which I
wanted that to be so good.
Yeah.
I really wanted that.
I've been
so
waiting
badly.
5 years, and it was not that great. But you know, at least you do have the ability, because there are so many. So going back to comics, there are so many different genres that you can go into within the superhero medium, down different avenues: horror, romance, you know, big epics and so forth. You have so much choice, and it's great that you can do that.
I mean, one thing I will say in response to the words that John sort of inserted in the conversation there about Scorsese is my general opinion actually tends to be that I don't think it's necessarily especially superhero media that is the problem with the film industry. For me, it's more the big budget blockbuster, like Hollywood blockbuster, which is kind of becoming the snake eating its own tail. And I think the film industry is going to kind of collapse in on itself because of this habit. However, responding to what John said, Joker, I thought, was a really great example of how you can take a superhero IP and teach people a little bit of media literacy, tell a story that's a bit more developed, a bit more interesting, that isn't your average crash bang wallop, you know, like popcorn film. And I do think we could do as a culture with a bit more literacy of there is a breadth of human experience that can be communicated via the screen that we're not being given because of the agenda set up by blockbuster capital.
Okay, I'd like to say that I've flipped on this subject numerous times. At the current place I'm in, I would say that ultimately that this is going to be controversial.
No.
Even though we've had superhero movies for many decades now, like, I feel that this renaissance has got potential to expand based on what Simon Mitchell was saying before, in that there are various different subgenres that we can go down, whether it be horror, space adventure, whatever. But I don't really see auteurs coming in like, say, Lynch or Campion and wanting to doing something with the superhero genre that will be beholden to their way of expressing themselves. I think even Lynch was taking the piss in one of the later episodes of Twin Peaks, the 3rd season, where he had a character have a Hulk fist. I shit you not. If you haven't seen Twin Peaks, it's probably freaking you out. But that happened. So I despair a little in that regard, because I would love to see what they would do if put in a position of telling a story with those elements and taking it seriously. But I don't think that their mindset really has ventured off into those fields. You know, if I could somehow get a Grant Morrison comic into like David Lynch's hands, who knows what it could do to the space-time continuum as we
or Tarantino. I mean, what would he do with a property? I mean, he's doing Star Trek.
I'm actually less interested in Tarantino getting his hands on a certain comic, because I've already seen comic book type
Style.
mentality through Tarantino's works already. He
Yeah.
doesn't need to do a comic book movie. And I hope that part of him realizes that, but who knows?
I'll do it.
Do we have anything else to say about the film industry and its positive or negative impacts made by comics, as in the superhero? No? Okay. So, Ola, you wanted to talk about representation of marginalized groups. Has the superhero been positive? Has it been negative in that regard?
Well, I think overall it's a very positive experience, because the superhero, since the very beginning, has represented weird looking people with capes, you know, and like for the LGBT community. Okay, I'm going to start with Wonder Woman. I watched this movie about the guy who created, like, I don't know, maybe it was a TV, you know what, have you guys seen it? You know what I'm talking about? And if this, hopefully it's truthful, if it's not fictional, but according to this story, he was in love with two different women. They kind of formed this threesome, you know, and then he was into bondage and you know, and role playing, because he got and this was in the 30s and the 40s when this guy got into this stuff, and somehow he created, you know, some, you know, a woman with a crown on her head and a rope and tying people up, and he, you know, there was a lot of spanking and stuff going on in the early Wonder Woman, you know, in the 40s, like okay. You know, I think when he actually started doing the comics, there were comments that it was getting a little too, you better calm down. There's, you know, putting her over her knee and spanking her, you know, it's just like, okay. But there's a guy living an alternative lifestyle, and then he creates Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman was huge for the gay community. You know, they love Linda Carter too. You know, I think Linda Carter has said that she, as you know, appreciates the support from the gay community when she did the TV series. It was I could see why, you know, there she was. The theme tune was great. Fighting for our rights in your style. I mean, hi. Disco.
I feel for you, Ola, because when I chanced upon that information as well, particularly there's a concept with the lasso of truth being connected to the lie detector test. All this stuff that you find out about in these documentaries, and you think, well, I can't tell other people about this because they're going to think I'm fucking crazy. Because for them, Wonder Woman is just like this female version of Superman. It's like, no, she's the product of a very, very complex trio relationship. Which involved a lot of bondage. So yeah,
there you know, you're wearing tights. You know, how many guys in the 30s were wearing leotard tights like Superman there in that cape? You know, I mean, so it was a way for men and women in some ways very early on, 30s and 40s, to get out of rigid gender roles. You know, especially the guys with the tights, because the woman, you know, Wonder Woman, I mean, she was a bit objectified without the skimpy outfit and stuff like that. But I mean, look at the huge Doctor Who. Like, Doctor Who is a huge gay following. Like, before New Who started, Old Who had a huge gay. That, in fact, you know, forget about going to the regular conventions. I always wanted to go to the gay Doctor Who conventions. Those are people getting together, the pink crowd. Yeah, no, seriously, they know how. Also, these people know how to party, man. You know, there's not going to be just like a bunch of sad geeks. Is it, you know? But they love Doctor Who. In fact, so much so that when Doctor Who was canceled in the 80s, I think it was the 80s. Yeah, it was the late 80s. It was canceled. They got together. And then, you know, they would have these groups, and they would constantly get together. They watch Who, and they put together an episode that they made with a whole gay cast, right? And the BBC, like, and they would show it at I've never seen this. I always wanted to see this, but apparently the BBC approved this thing that they did as part of their canon, even though it's never been shown anywhere. I've just read about it somewhere where the BBC, you know, lent its credence to the gay community creating this one-off episode that they did somewhere. I just read about it a long time ago, and I would love to see that episode. I can't, you know. Then there's the gay doctor, you know, the first gay doctor somewhere unofficially, not seen ever on the screen. But yeah, Doctor Who, Jodie Foster suddenly, Jodie Foster, right? Jodie, whatever her name is. Sorry, not Jodie Foster. The woman who took on Who. The idea that, well, and the things that she has to put up with. She's we've always seen her as the guy in the situation. Now, she's still the doctor. The doctor is the doctor, regardless of what her physical physique is. The best mind in the universe dealing with morons. Trying to solve a situation, and then you kind of see, like, I always thought that those kind of things, like Doctor Who, like Wonder Woman, they let you expand what you think is possible, what's allowed, because in normal society, everybody's dressing this way or that way in their gender roles, but somehow there's somebody totally transgressing this, and society loves them, and there's no judgment on them because they're super. Somehow being super allows you to be above the normal conventions, and maybe allows you to do, like a god, like we've talked about before, like the superheroes being the Greek gods, or just somebody who, or like a, Liberace, he can get away with that cape because he's Liberace. Or
There is a lot of spandex.
Artists will be quite openly, flamboyantly wearing capes and gay or whatever, and though they might not come out and say they're gay, but the people are not judging them because they love what they're doing, and just pointing out that these limitations are ridiculous. Why can't regular people just choose whatever they want to be? Why do we have to be limited by these gender constrictions? So I personally think that, yes, the superhero genre has greatly helped a lot of marginalized groups. Now, I mean, in terms of the gay community, yes. In terms of people of color, I think it's been a bit late to the party. Like Black Panther turned up, and they used the word Black Panther. This was a radical. Black Panther is rather a radical group that were totally. The FBI was targeting them, and a lot of those people went to jail. I think for, like, Angela Davis, if you've ever read her biography of how she went to jail, like somebody had used a gun that was registered to her in her name in a robbery or something, and she was, they're trying to get her because she was a communist and a Black Afro-American, Afro-American activist. And then I guess maybe the comic borrowed. This is maybe the comic borrowed. I think that the Black Panthers came first, and maybe Black Panther So I don't know, guys. I'm not sure where Black Panther came from. In fact, I never knew he existed until the movie came out.
I couldn't really say. I think he's around the 60s. I'm not sure, John, if you know.
Black Panther was 66, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
There you go.
In Fantastic Four.
They reckon that Black Panther was actually based on Lothar, who came about in 1934. Lothar was the secondary character in a book that starred a character called Mandrake, who, if you're really old, you may know that Mandrake and the ghost who walks, the Phantom, and I'm going off on the old fucking one, but they were in a group together. But Lothar is actually the template for Black Panther, because he was apparently a prince of various different nations in Africa, and he decided to abscond or abdicate from that rule so that he could follow Mandrake into the new world and help him solve crimes.
Well, if this was Stan Lee that created him, I'm going to assume that I believe the Black Panthers were going before 66, and I imagine that Stan Lee probably saw them and went, I'm going to create Black.
I think that there's an interesting thing here that dovetails on quite nicely, if you don't mind, to a point that I was going to bring up, which is that comic books traditionally have this long history of being by outsiders for outsiders. Siegel and Shuster created Superman. He's sort of the he's often referred to as sort of like the immigrant stand-in, because they were Jewish immigrants to New York. You've got Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who, have varying degrees of disagreement with government and varying characters throughout. And for instance, the X-Men is the classic stand-in. You know, Stan and Jack were always trying to bring in things, and they'd always bring them in under the radar. Like you say, particularly people of different, you know, like cultures, ethnicities, skin colors particularly, didn't get much of a look in, because in the 60s, censorship was high, but they always tried to backdoor these ideas in to try and make people more inclusive. And yet, for me, growing up as a kid, you know, like the X-Men was a hugely important thing. For my dad, he loves Daredevil. That was his favorite thing. And because Daredevil was disabled, he's like, this is a disabled super. I love this. You know, like this is the best thing ever. But now there's this kind of weird pushback, a sort of switch around where people pretend that none of that stuff had ever happened. And then now we're trying to include too many people and represent too many people. And it's SJW's gone mad. And you're like, where have you been for 60 years?
Ollie, I'm glad that you brought that up, because for a lot of people, they wouldn't really understand that history already being there. They wouldn't understand, even if they are aware of Wonder Woman's history, as Ollie brought up, they wouldn't be aware that that is part of the history. And to an extent, I don't blame them for coming up with their ideas. I don't side with them, but I can see why they think that, because this industry from the top down is owned by a lot of straight white men who, even if they aren't straight, want to propagate that as being the norm. So therefore, if you say back in the day, they've always been there, maybe in terms of the creators and their ideas, but for a lot of people, there is Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. They all seem to be straight people. Yeah. So,
well, they seem to be straight, but they're still defying gender ideas about gender in terms of, like I said, the costumes.
Yeah, this is the thing. You understand that, but if you were to go into a classroom and talk about the history of Wonder Woman, I'm sure that you might have an issue with how some teachers will take that history as it unfolds, because they're under a mandate to have a certain idea or diaspora in that classroom being shared. They don't necessarily want to have the history of Wonder Woman being part of canon. It's a bit like talking like about Hercules. Everyone thinks about the Disney Hercules being a hero when we know that Hera punished him for killing his children in a rage by giving him the 12 labors. That in itself, you know, tells you what happens when you put things into a paradigm that supports the mainstream idea of what is normal. Do you understand?
Matt, yeah, what do you want to say?
It's interesting, you know, because it reminds me of something I actually only thought about today. I was watching a video about girl boss feminism, and it wasn't even in the video. It was just something that kind of came across to me as a result of it when they were discussing the mythos around Margaret Thatcher, right? And I feel like there's this thing where if you were growing up at the time, you have this implicit understanding of the background and forces behind something. But then if you look at the modern day, there's this kind of need to kind of paper over the ugly bits. And so, for instance, with Margaret Thatcher, something I've kind of noticed when I've just looking at Twitter discourse, basically, seen arguments saying, oh, Margaret Thatcher was a girl boss, the first ever female prime minister. So good, girl power, you know, and it's like you completely plaster over any kind of negative thing she might have done because she was the first female prime minister. Sorry, I have a few things to say because they've been kind of been percolating. This kind of leads me on to another thought that I was having about, you know, the idea of, you know, comic books being by outsiders for outsiders. But we're now in this situation where it's not outsiders who are writing the comics anymore. I mean, they do to an extent, but these are now owned by big companies that are very much the in-group. You know, these characters, although they have this rich heritage, they are now kind of publicly owned by anyone. And I wonder if by that very virtue, it then becomes kind of impossible or very difficult to still be a force for progressive issues when you're having to satisfy a much wider audience that doesn't necessarily represent the initial one.
I think the thing is that the audience of comics from the very beginning has always been outsiders. And I think that even though it is corporate and you definitely have a right to say, hold on a second, but I really think that you can't like. I just believe that like it's kind of like musicians. Yeah, you're gonna have rock stars that are gonna be so big that you're like, were they Elton John? Like really? But you know, but that's it. That's like some of our rock stars become superstars. And but they still have that a way of bridging the gap between regular people and the outside. And maybe that's what their popularity is all about. I mean, does it lose some edge? You know, has Elton John really lost his edge? Tremble in the wind or whatever. Yeah, sure, absolutely. You know, but there's, you know, I guess you have to be wary, but I still think it has a way of crossing boundaries, even though it's, but it's both. Yes.
Yeah.
And
I mean, absolutely. I agree with you. I'm not trying to say that superheroes are a universal force for bad in any way, shape, or form. I'm just kind of saying there's a sort of wariness about this need to legitimize a certain set of views in a certain way so that it can appeal to a broad base versus telling the stories that they came from. And sort of leading on from that, kind of a question for everyone was, you know, when we talk about this, do we believe there's such a thing as bad representation? Is there
yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. Can I just say something? Wait, I want to say something about Spider-Man. Because and then really quick, Spider-Man was, I think to me, Spider-Man was of the superhero folks, was one of the first really outsider of the superhero people. Because like Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman, they were all like accepted by society, but Spider-Man comes on the scene and he's broke, and he's like, and the police are after, and his boss hates him. He's the first vigilante. He's not a superhero. He's the first. You know, he didn't want to be a superhero. He's the first guy who, he didn't want to do his stuff for good until his uncle got killed or something like that. Was that what it was? His uncle got killed, and you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't motivated by truth, justice. You know, it was, he had to, circumstances had to come in to make him that way. And you know, when it comes to the outsider, he's my first one. When I look at that canon of caped people, I go, you know.
I'd say that arguably Batman was there first. However, I think the way Spider-Man is treated is very much how people looked at teenagers. You're not really basically a father yet. You're not really a kid yet. You're this thing in the middle, and you don't seem to be hanging out with the other kids doing sports. You like, what, science books? Get out of here, you know. So
but you tell me how. I want to know why you think Batman was there first.
Batman had exterior forces that made him want to fight crime. Spider-Man's story, I think, is more.
Yeah, but like the police, no, like I want to say that that's not what I mean. Like, yes, he had a motive too. You are absolutely right. But Batman was in the system. They had a bat light for him.
Yeah,
Spider-Man.
that happens later. Maybe I'm being too geeky about this. You're essentially right if you're talking about how Jonah Jameson used the media to make Spider-Man into someone that was seen as villainous. Arguably, because there's been so many stories from Batman, that it could be easier to see him as being part of the system, because in most of the stories, Gordon is helping him through a bat signal and whatnot. But if you were to go way back, when Batman basically comes onto the scene, he is seen as this otherworldly creature, and you don't even know if he's human. So therefore, he wasn't part of the system to begin with. But yeah, I do want to know what other people think of that question.
Ollie had something to say. I'm sorry I interrupted you. What did you want to say?
I can't remember where we got to be honest.
Oh shit! Sorry.
How did we get here?
Matt had a really good question.
Yeah, there is. Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say, sorry, Matt. I was just going to say there is the dissonance between the two major publishers. So you do have obviously DC, which focuses on your slightly otherworldly characters, your Superman, your Wonder Woman, your gods. But then you have Marvel that focus on more your street level characters, or the ones who maybe have built their own suits of armor, technology, and so forth. And I think that people relate to them in different ways. So, for example, I learned about Christopher Peast, who wrote the early Power Man comics and so forth. And a lot of the stories that were written in Power Man were just focused on, you know, sorting out your local street corner robbery or helping out Harlem, which obviously is translated into the further TV shows and so forth. But that's something that people really, really were attracted to and drawn to. And that's what Marvel and how Marvel really managed to keep themselves afloat during those really tough years later on by making themselves grounded, while DC focused on, you know, massive spectacle and so forth, like the Crisis on Infinite Earth stories.
I would say, I'm going to sound like fucking being a dickhead here, but I'd say what you're saying made sense in a statement between, like, say, at the beginning of comics, well, for Marvel, after it became Timely Comics, up until, like, say, the late 90s. But they've both been cross-pollinating. For every god that's in the DC universe, you got the Eternals now. For every street character that's, like, say, Spider-Man looking after his neighborhood, you got Black Canary. So I don't think the divisions between DC and Marvel are as clear-cut as they used to be.
Not so much anymore, but I'm just thinking more of like Stan Lee and obviously his writing partner. Sort of, they have always said that they utilize their characters as platforms for them to speak out about themselves, and then subsequent writers and editors within that sort of 70s, 80s, 90s period really did utilize it as a platform, while DC, being the bigger juggernaut, focused on just acquiring a lot of their bigger characters as well.
So Matt's question, because I'm very aware that he's been patiently waiting for an answer. Do you want to reiterate it again for the audience so we can jump in?
Yeah, sure. So just kind of building off this whole idea of, you know, representation, and it's the idea of, do we believe in bad representation in superhero media, and if so, what does that look like?
I have not only remembered what I was going to say, but now you've said the question. So there was one thing that I wanted to bring up, which was, it's a bit of a yarn. It's kind of the last 10 years, but cut short. There's this whole problem, there's this whole thing with a particular writer, Mark Millar, and also Brian Michael Bendis, and them trying to bring into Marvel stuff that, you know, that their kids want to bring. Like you say, they want to bring their own lives into the comic books. And I think particularly with Bendis, he tried to introduce a whole bunch of characters which were more diverse, which I applaud him for, to be fair. But it was such a scattershot hit and miss thing that it caused more division than it caused positivity. So in some respects, you get the positive cases like Miles Morales, who is like the sort of half black, half Hispanic Spider-Man replacement, who is really well liked. You get someone like America Chavez, who's a Hispanic sort of superhero, who is, and even I'm going to say it, so poorly written, it actually makes you want to bite your own fist at some points, and so it does no favors to anyone. Yeah. And then people in the middle, like a character called Riri Williams, who's she's sort of the black female stand-in for Iron Man, who was greeted to a round of absolute tumbleweed. And it's so difficult to know, and there doesn't seem to be a formula to it. So many people have written and spoken about it and said, you know, this works in this because of this, and this doesn't because of this. But it just seems to be whatever internet culture is annoyed at today seems to define whether these things work or not.
I have one thinking of bad representation, just a bad, I don't know if it's marginalized, I have to think about it, but I think the new Wonder Woman movie was really bad representation for Wonder Woman. No
spoilers. No spoilers.
Okay, no spoilers.
Talk about it, but no spoilers. Yeah.
You have not seen it. You haven't seen it?
Well, I don't know who's watching this that hasn't seen it, so therefore.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So how do I just I just think that there's some weird ideas of feminism going on in Wonder Woman. The like you've got I don't think I'm going to spoil it by just saying that there's like the typical like guy is a lech walking down the street. Wonder Woman has to come down and save him, you know. So there's there's like a lot of guys being creepy in it. Like Wonder Woman can't go to a party and just everybody going, hey mama, how's it going, you know. And it was like it was just kind of a little bit, I don't know, maybe in the 80s that it was, and this was probably the world of Donald Trump too, 80s kind of thing that she was doing, and maybe the guys were all creepy and shit like that at a party. Maybe they were, but like the supposed antagonist to Wonder Woman, like her whole thing that she wants the most is to be like a high-heeled tart. You know, that's it. She just wants to be objectified. That's like what she likes about, you know, she envies Diana or envies Wonder Woman and aspires through various things to acquire these things. I mean, all she needed was just to get rid of the glasses and change her. It was it was just a wardrobe change. You know, she wasn't unattractive to begin with, but you know what I mean. But like the whole like makeover thing, that's a terrible representation about femininity and what femininity wants.
Perhaps we're talking about the same thing using different examples. We're talking about bad writing. I don't necessarily think this
there was bad writing too.
Yeah, well, that is bad writing, because even if they are making a point that is specific to the 80s, even if in Ollie's case, when they're having a character that is clearly there to represent but is not actually a character, that is going to be an issue. I wouldn't say it causes division. I say it actually lets us see the division was already there. Because as I said before, the mainframe of comics wasn't necessarily set up for the representation of people who are gay or the people who are Black, as far as knowing who they are and therefore promoting a story, really saying that they were there to be an attachment for those male lead characters. So some of the incidents that you're talking about now are just carryovers from writing rooms where they haven't asked themselves enough questions. You know, Brian Michael Bendis writing a Black Hispanic Spider-Man, I've got faith in that, because not only does he have people in his family who he's intimate with, who understand his job and therefore can talk to him about it, and him being able to investigate that, he's a very good writer. But in the wrong hands, any of these characters will only come across as supporting a supremacy value.
I have a light bulb went in my mind while you're speaking, John. It was a beautiful thing. Yeah, I figured out what it is. It's like when the representation is bad, it's when it's not real.
Yeah.
It's gotta be real.
That's
when it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to follow on from Ollie and Matt's sort of questions in regards to obviously the characters as Riri Williams, America Chavez, and a few others, all sort of appeared and came out around the same time in the comics as well. And I really do get the feeling that it was a studio mandate or an executive mandate to say, we need to tick these boxes. Okay, we've done some testing in different focus groups, and we think that if we bring out these characters that cover Black, maybe LGBT, QT, and a few other bits and pieces as well, in 5 to 6 years, we may be able to get a movie out of it later on. And essentially, you're seeing that now, because if you look at the rest of Marvel's slate, because the original legacy characters are now ending their contracts and going elsewhere, they're now being replaced by these newer characters, which is great. You know, I want it to continue, but essentially at what cost? Essentially, because they weren't well received back then. And I don't necessarily think that a Riri Williams taking over from Robert Downey, Tony Stark, is going to do that well. And I think she's going to get slated for it, unfortunately.
Simon, I'm going to coin Matt's phrase here. That sounds like rainbow capitalism, my friend.
Yes. Well, we understand how popular Black Panther was, and you know how much money was spent by the Black community, and also how much promotion they got it, because everyone did do the and dancing around when they saw the film. It was like that, and I don't know. That's a one-off in my case. I
The
don't
way
think
forward really is about having talented, curious writers, having a good business relationship with the executive producers of whoever's in charge of the comic book industry or the film industry or the television industry. If they are truly on the same page, the product is going to be powerful and it'll be undeniable. Even if I don't like a story, I can respect it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I can't respect it if they mandate a certain character who has been straight for God knows how many decades is suddenly pansexual. Like that's what's happened to Wolverine. Apparently, Iceman. Yeah, apparently Iceman in the comics has now come out as gay. And like,
it's been for a while. Yeah.
The thing is, if these things are coming from a good galvanizing, well-seeded plot, great. But I suspect rainbow capitalism, as Matt was saying.
I think, Simon, it really gives it away when it sounded like they just did a focus group and then went, that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah, I think they do, but they're also pushing away from that because you do have a new comic called I Am Not Starfire, which is causing a lot of conversation on the online community, which is where I stand more or sit down and listen at things. And it's really about Starfire's daughter, who is Starfire is obviously a DC character from the Titans, you know, very, very powerful, 6 foot tall, red hair, shoots laser bolts. And her daughter is a chubby goth. And I think she's also a lesbian or bisexual. I'm not sure. But a lot of the questions that we're asking is, do I, not me personally, but because I don't read the comic, but the people who have read the comics, like, I don't want to see that for my comic book characters or my superheroes. I look to my superheroes to, you know, be confident and to be just. And while this character is much more introverted, and she generally hates her mother as well. And a lot of people feel really annoyed that they're pushing that type of character. And they did the same thing with the Square Soft Snowflake and Safe Space.
Yeah,
and a few others as well.
I mean, essentially, like, I won't talk about those specific cases because I haven't read the media.
Neither have I.
But I do think that if people are writing really interesting stories, then it will survive any kind of particular cultural malaise or kind of like pushback. So, you know, I almost don't even know how talking about it really benefits those people. So you didn't like seeing a particular kind of person in the comic book. Cool, don't buy it, move on. Do you know what I mean?
I think this is interesting. You talked about, I'm surprised, Simon, you don't like Starfire, or was it because like you like a lot about this Matt and boys, which I do. I like boys.
No, I like Starfire.
Oh, but no, but I see she's like an anti-hero, like the boys character. That's right, what when you're with the daughter that you're talking about, you know, and that's why when you were describing her, I was becoming interested because she was a anti-hero, as you so to speak. See, I'm not always interested in our heroes to be confident. I mean, I think it started with Spider-Man. Spider-Man wasn't wasn't always confident, you know. That's what made him great. You know, that's part of his charm.
As I said, I don't really know the character that well. I haven't read it all the way through, so I can't really comment. But just looking at the general messaging boards, it's not being received well. Similar to what you're getting in the Star Wars High Republic as well. Comics, they're not being received well because of corporate box ticking and so forth. And it's going to be interesting. I'm really looking forward to Future State, what they do with that, because they've changed all of the characters essentially. You've got a black Batman, you've got a Puerto Rican Wonder Woman, and first, I think I'm not sure. There's another character.
Oh man, Puerto Rican Wonder. All right, Latino. Ciao for Wonder Woman. Yeah.
I would like to move on to like there's 2 more subheadings. First is television. Does anyone believe that superhero fiction has been bad or great for TV? Anyone?
Great. I'm just gonna say great. I think it's been great for TV. That's it. That's all I'm gonna say.
I think there was an element of fatigue in there for a while, I think, or it has been. it's an interesting thing where like stuff that I was incredibly stoked about for several years has now gotten to be such a drag that I'm like, oh, that's a shame. And then other things which I thought were amazing died on their ass. You know, it's a strange thing. Television is a weird and strange place. When you make a movie, you make the movie, it goes out and it's done. When you make a TV show, you don't know if you'll get your second series. You don't know if you're going to be fireflied around episode 6. So you can't do much, you know.
I want to make one more thing I want to say about television and why it's interesting. When Buffy came out, there have been comparisons to Buffy and Dickens. And Dickens used to be the first one who serialized his stories, you know, from episode to episode to episode. And I think that's what television has. It has that, well, you know, maybe that soap opera thing where today's new episode, you know, it has that ability to take the story further for better or for worse, you know, because sometimes people, like you said, people get tired, like Smallville. It should have been retired, well, a long time after it started.
Yeah.
Really. Jesus, like, but you know what I mean? Like, it depends, you know, it's got good, that's it. When people get tired, when they're Arrow should have been retired a long time. I watched that whole thing. It's yeah, I don't know.
God, really?
I did.
Yeah.
I know. But it got me into
3, and I thought, fucking hell, man. This
yeah,
is
no, you were right. You were right. The guy who played him was just so wooden and shit. But it got me into Flash, and Flash was great. I still love Flash. I still enjoy Flash because it's fun.
Okay,
You know,
I jumped off of that ship as well, to be honest. I like seasons 1 and 2. But before this becomes too subjective, I want to quickly say that my instincts regarding the film industry and superheroes, you know how I was kind of like chopping and changing on that? I'm very certain that television is where the superhero genre ought to be, because not only is it obviously more linked to what comics do in that it's long form storytelling, but I feel that there's much more experimentation going on there. I can easily reel them off, like say The Boys, even as far back as 2013's Daredevil, which arguably kind of stuck in a lot of people's minds, and from there on in, everyone really wanted to jump in on that. But yeah, I find that there's a lot of health going on when it comes to superheroes and TV.
Sorry, I just really want to jump in on that because, I mean, one, I am a massive Daredevil fan and Luke Cage and pretty much every single one of those series apart from the Iron Fist, which I think kind of went there. But anyway, what I meant to say off the back of that is that I do think we are in a renaissance of TV, like massively so. And I feel like the thought I had whilst John was speaking was that part of the reason I think we're here is we have people like Amazon and Netflix. They're raking in cash. They've got so much money to throw around, and they can just throw money at things and experiment in a way that most other mediums can't do. And I think that allows for a much higher level of creativity and risk. Unfortunately, I also think that leads to, I haven't seen it so much on other platforms, but fucking Netflix, I don't know what the hell is up with them. They create these ridiculously great series and then they just cut them off.
Yeah, they do that. Yeah, they do that for money reasons or something. Like they sign a contract.
I think that's also the dictate from Feige and his group as well at the top over at Marvel Studios and also Disney, because if they feel that there's going to be some sort of crossover or it's going to be too complicated for movie watchers, and then they go off to watch the series and they don't understand why the Defenders weren't in the Avengers movies and so forth, they kind of have to stop it there and go, no, let's not talk about it, and let's try and sort it out later. And actually now we're finding, especially as Matt said, we're going through this renaissance is because you do have a studio head like a Kevin Feige, who, while isn't there day to day, is now overseeing all of the Marvel film group and TV group. And essentially they share story ideas to say, okay, we're going to be doing, Wandavision at the moment. This is going to lead into Doctor Strange 2, which then off the back of that is going to have effects of Spider-Man 3, which means we can talk about the multiverse, which means we can have, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and also Dr. Ock and Electro
God.
as well. We're going to have all that in Spider-Man 3, but this is all leading off the back of Wandavision, Falcon and Winter Soldier. It's all one unit. DC can't do that. Yeah.
I have one thing to say, to go on with what Matt was saying. Yes, we are in a renaissance, but only in the US, not in the UK. Because and the reason why is the UK, for example, Doctor Who, is not a renaissance. As much as I love New Who, it doesn't do story arc. In fact, UK television is notorious for short episodes and one-off episodes, and they don't, even in general, they don't really get, like Buffy started it. And for me, Buffy started it, and then I saw it in tons of other US TVs that suddenly picked up a story arc is a great idea. Because, in the 70s and 80s, a lot of stuff was one-off. Even Star Trek, a lot of early Star Trek was one-off. But Doctor Who, it doesn't have it could use a bit more investment in an arc that goes through the whole season that grips you. You saw it with Russell T Davies reboots, and Torchwood stank. That's terrible.
I feel that we
Sorry,
may have gone off a little bit off topic, but just because I don't understand, you saying that Buffy the Vampire started off story arcs in television or just superhero type media? For
myself personally, okay. I think because it was in the 90s, it started, before the 90s, especially I grew up watching a lot of TV, way too much TV, and it was very formulaic in America, and they didn't have story arcs. Like you'd fall in love in one episode and lose someone, and that's it. And that would be that would be what 70s and 80s TV was like. And it wasn't until the 90s when Buffy came on the scene, and it was and the arc, and even in science fiction, I watched all the Star Treks, I watched Doctor Who, and yes, there were arcs that old Who, which would last 6 episodes or whatever, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't like the Buffy thing. And then it just, and from there on, it expanded to other genres. It wasn't just Buffy. It leaked into, or maybe there was a couple of other things before that. But for me, that's when it hit me.
Sure. I would say Twin Peaks owes a lot to this conversation, or rather, where the conversation has gone. I'd like to know if anyone thinks that superhero fiction has been positive or negative for television. Anyone who hasn't really spoken about that specific subheading.
I think overall, I know I'm always the positivity guy, but I think it's been good in some ways. It's gotten a bit too unwieldy, like the movies. There's too much going on, but there's been some really good stuff in there, like the Netflix stuff. And I was going to say, good news for you, Simon and Matt. Guess who's going to be Spider-Man's lawyer? But
yes, yeah.
But, I heard about that. It's so cool.
Yeah. It is cool.
So I think overall it's been positive. Like the Flash has been great. Black Lightning, whilst being a bit awkward, has been a really
Lightning. I like Black Lightning.
It had some really solid moments. I was watching it going, yeah, this is what I want to see. And some slightly more odd ones. I think they've been slipping around the back. It's good. But like you say, Ola, like the British TV is a different kettle of fish. I think everyone would have beaten an old lady with a stick to get another episode of Sherlock, but we're not going to get one. Things like that. So it's been tough.
I think I dropped off with the TV stuff around 2018 when I'd watched 3 or 4 seasons of Arrow, a couple of seasons of Flash and Supergirl and so forth, and I just saw the same formula. And I just couldn't do it anymore, and I just got so bored. And then you started having your runways come in. I didn't even watch Legion. I didn't watch a few others, because anything that was attached to a TV property, because I was disappointed by the Netflix stuff in the later seasons as well, because they all just followed the formula. Now I think, as I just said before, now that we've started Marvel Phase 4 and they've got a really clear plan of what is going to happen for the next 4 to 5 years across all of their mediums, I'm becoming excited again. And I'm glad that the Arrowverse is kind of dead, because Lois and Superman, no interest at all. I saw Lois and Clark. That was great. I was also 12. I don't want to watch it anymore.
Really good point. Like, essentially, I'd say that if you're of a certain age, then potentially all of these things are interesting. For me personally, I think I work from The Boys and then move out from that, because no matter, even if you haven't even read comics, just the extremely well nuanced critique on consumer culture and who we choose to represent us in positions of power, that show does so well that even calling it a superhero show feels a little bit odd to me, because it's going beyond what people think of when they call something a superhero show, which in itself is a bias, I guess.
I just want to say this, like, when I watch Flash and Arrow, it was because I was eating. I would have like, that's my eating TV. But I liked Flash. I actually really like Flash, and I still like Supergirl. But because I'm like a child inside my head, so it cape, yay! You know, that's my kind of. I'm always have a soft spot for these things. But what we were Legion, I recommend you take a look at that, Simon, because that shit's weird. That shit gets weird.
Legion's weird. I've got WandaVision. I'm good. WandaVision is very weird.
WandaVision is all. I was going to mention the two things that are going in a new way was Legion and WandaVision. They're different in different ways. I think Legion started off much better than WandaVision, though, mate. So
I've heard it's good.
You might want to just don't just say no to Legion, because that shit. The first season, season 2 and 3, but season 1. I recommend of Legion very highly, but WandaVision, yeah, man. I mean, by the way, oh no, I'm not going to say this now, but yeah, I've been watching WandaVision, and I'm a bit like, let's hope this gets going somewhere, because it's just like a pastiche of 60s and 70s. The second episode of WandaVision, or no, the third episode of WandaVision, this is a fun-filled fact. I know you guys didn't get it here, but that house, which is based in the 70s, that's the Brady Bunch house. They designed the Brady Bunch house. Yeah. The first house, in the second first 2 episodes, that's the Bewitched house. That is, they even had the door with the thing. That is, they designed it that way.
Dick Van Dyke. So.
Yeah, I think they kind of want you to know that. I don't think they're trying to rip it off or anything. I think.
Oh no, they said so. They said we did it, but they didn't need them to tell me. I saw it and went, oh yeah, because I watched that shit.
I mean, that's. I mean, I won't go into spoilers, but I think the first 2 episodes of the WandaVision thing, they left me a little cold, and that could be simply because. I can see where they're going with it, and so once you get that quite earlier on, it feels a bit laborious. So I wish I could like literally take out certain storylines out of my brain from what I've seen in the comics.
Yeah, I know exactly.
So like I see that. I think the third episode was more interesting because they're showing me different elements of their interpretation of those storylines. And I can't wait for it to all be over, because some of the Easter eggs are particularly interesting in terms of what they're trying to say. Hey, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, look at what's really going on. But yeah, I'd like to see more surrealism in the superhero genre via TV, and I think that's where it will flourish.
Can I ask a quick question? What do you people think about dropping a series as a whole or spacing it out weekly?
Can we keep that for a particularly? I'm gonna do a video on that.
Oh, okay, okay.
Like I feel that this entire video has been dropping Easter eggs. Everything we'll do up until.
You better come back, guys. Come back.
I want to say one thing about WandaVision. One thing that's a problem with WandaVision is it's just like a homage to those 2 TVs. Like it's a homage to that show, and that's why I didn't like it, because I watched a lot of 60s and I watched a lot of Bewitched. I watched the Brady Bunch, and that kind of like, you know, they move the story along. That's why I like it.
I found it laborious as well, and I can see why you'd find a particular pastiche being a problem, as did I. But I don't know, it depends on what you've read. But I think if you go back to elements of Wanda's backstory in Age of Ultron, in terms of what she went through and what I think is comforting for her, that is my fan theory as to what is going on.
Because I don't know anything about WandaVision. If I've seen her in the Marvel things, I've forgotten her. Sure. I don't know anything about her.
I feel like there's like this dangerous ledge called John. You're walking on spoilers. What the fuck?
Yeah, stop.
So I'm gonna get off of there, even though it's just a theory. But hey, it's just a theory.
A film.
Yeah, can we move? If anyone's got anything.
Wait, Oliver's desperate. I can see it.
I was just gonna say there was one thing I just wanted to chuck in really quickly, because I wanted to tie back a quick thing. which was Simon mentioned genre pieces in movies, and we were talking about that, and we were talking about surrealism and so on. And all I wanted to say was, of all the superhero shows and comic book shows that have come up, the ones that are the most genre piece are the ones that do really well, like Legion and Preacher. The first season of Preacher was absolutely stellar. Like
Lucifer.
Lucifer and Daredevil, when it was basically being Law and Order rather than a superhero show, or Jessica Jones being, you know, Cagney.
Oh, yeah.
I love Jessica Jones.
They were great. But then as soon as you hit Iron Fist, what is that like? Like, as soon as you hit Arrow, once you take out the sort of like gritty parts of it, what's left? You're just watching it for Felicity, really. You know, that's it. Anyway, move on, John.
Sorry, I'll leave it. I had a point on Iron Fist, but it'll probably distract us, so I'll let you carry on.
Oh, John. No, I'm never tired of hearing bad things about Iron Fist.
This is not so much a bad thing. It's more a missed opportunity in a way that I think Iron Fist could actually have been a lot better. And technically, it would have been fucking with the source material. It wouldn't have been canon. But there's a scene towards the end of the first season where the Iron Fist goes up against this big bad. I can't remember the character's role in the story, but he's this Asian guy who's kind of a drunken master. Like he gets really drunk and he fights whilst he's drunk, right? He was originally auditioned to be the actual immortal Iron Fist. And when you see him fighting, you get a preview of how good the kung fu fighting in Iron Fist could have been if he would just, and if he was Iron Fist, I just feel like there would have been a very interesting story to tell there around a second generation culture Asian person reconnecting with their roots, rather than a white guy coming in and being better than all the kind of Asian people at their kind of
the white great hope, was it?
Yeah, exactly. You know,
you know, you've got this really good point there. Essentially, you're saying that he was saying, I'm the paragon of this martial art, and you accept that. I think there's this whole kind of like history to Iron Fist, which doesn't really work well in our current understanding of what plays out. What could have been good is if he had to lose elements of his privilege so he could actually become a better person. That's the true story of Iron Fist that could work. I mean, let's face it, he's a rich boy, he's got it all going for him. Then he crashes into the mountains and loses his family. I mean, that's pretty hardcore, but we don't get a sense that when he turns into this martial arts geezer, when he comes back to America, that he's truly humbled himself. He had the same issues as Anakin Skywalker in the second prequel movie. This guy simply is unlikable. And you don't have to be likable to be a good character, but that didn't make sense about him because he would say that he was humble. He would promote the idea that he was humble when he was dealing with people, but he didn't come across that way. And that
he should have just been Batman.
That's the thing.
Same thing. Yeah.
That's the thing.
It's like the bad news is that guy is also the actor in the Marvel Puzzle Quest. That's his face. I keep seeing.
Well, you know,
the great dope.
That's a homogenized aspect of this corporate entity that is Marvel, just replicating itself of whatever's the current phases. But I would say that Iron Fist was a missed opportunity, not necessarily because of the acting or the person that was playing Iron Fist, but because of the inherent story. And I feel bad for the actor because it's not that the actor was bad, but those lines, there's only one way you can truly play them. If someone's telling you that they're humble and they're a good person, then I start to get suspicious. I'd rather see that in action. But yeah, let's move on to our final element, the games industry. Have superhero fiction in any way been a good or a negative influence on that industry?
I mean, I think there's some very interesting things about how we even consider the idea of what a superhero is interesting when we come to games. You know, to maybe give us a slightly controversial view, I feel like in terms of the games industry, a character like Mario or Kirby is actually a lot closer to being a superhero than the actual superhero games. Like, I'm not saying that's the rule across the board, but I mean in terms of the risks that are taken, the sort of stories that are told, like, okay, there are places where it works. Like, I think Batman Arkham Asylum was a good example of superheroes crossing over into games. But because we've got this thing where the film industry is kind of calling the shots still in terms of how everything else pans out, you end up with things like the Avengers game where it's just all about the money. And I think that is the issue, basically. If you can remove the money from it, at least in some sense, then you can start getting these genuinely interesting stories.
I have one thing to say, because I don't actually play games that much at all, really. But I did get into the Buffy game after when the series came out, because I was so desperate to get into more. And I think for me, and I've played a couple of games, but one thing, and it goes along with what Matt is saying. What I liked, there was 2 Buffy games that were released on Xbox, and I got them both, and I played them all the way to the end, even though I'm shit and died a lot because I'm not good at this shit, right? But there was a story. It had all the actors. The first one was better than the second one, I think, but because you had a lot of the original actors, more of the original actors, but most of the original actors doing the voices. But there was a good story. I got into the plot. It had an ooky feeling, and I think that's the problem with superhero stuff. If you're just doing it to it seems to me like a lot of the superhero stuff is just cashing in on a buck, cashing in on the thing, and if they don't have a story, it's going to stink. And you can tell me whether that's the case, because you guys play more games than me.
I was going to say, it really depends on what period of time we're talking about. I think in the recent years, superheroes and games have gone together really well. If you're looking at Arkham Knight being not so great, but Arkham City, fucking amazing. Arkham Asylum, these are all Batman games if you don't know, but essentially, this is quite sad, but I would feel really happy playing the Arkham City game if it was like, say, 2 in the morning. And it's got it all in that sentence, right? Because you're thinking that you're Batman, and you don't have to do all the main mission. You can literally just spend about 3 hours, that's how sad I was, 3 hours perching on fucking buildings, looking around and finding bad guys. You go down there, you swoop down, you take them out, and you go back up to the building, you're looking around. And maybe this has had a negative impact on the comic book industry, because if I was like the age when I was into like getting into comics the first time, I was like about 11, because like obviously it was the Batman TV show from the 60s. I watched that, but I got into the comics, and that was just before the Tim Burton movie came out. I was really into it. But if I was that age now, I don't think I would find the comic books. I think I would be playing that PlayStation, because I'd be brought up with screens. I'd be brought up with visual aids being my form of interpretation of stories. So in regards to this question, has it been good for the games industry? Yes, but at the expense of the comic book experience.
Go on, Matt.
Sorry, just one thing very quickly in response to that, because it reminds me of one really good failed experiment that happened with the games industry that I think almost points at a future in a way, if we could bring back that format somehow, is sort of the golden age of the Telltale game, where you had things like The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us, where these were basically interactive comics. Like they weren't your average kind of RPG, like beat 'em up style game. They were literally a linear story where you made choices that affected the narrative, but it was told in the visual language of the comic book.
Yeah, absolutely. The Batman Telltale game is one of the best. I didn't play it, but I watched it, or someone else play it through a playthrough, and I thought that was great. I mean, in regards to games, I was first introduced to it from watching the animated X-Men shows back in sort of 93, 94, and then searching out my uncle's Sega Mega Drive. And I think he had the original X-Men games on there, and also Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. And I went back and forth trying to find, because what they would do is they would give a storyline to a random publisher, and they say, look, turn this into a game, and then you would end up playing Maximum Carnage on your Sega Mega Drive, swinging around as Spider-Man or as Venom, and then you'd have these random. I didn't even know who Vision was when I played my first Avengers game, so I went out to the comics to go find out. Oh, it's this guy, but he was white. Back then it was pure white and very interesting character. And then skipping forward to now, I think what Matt originally said in regards to, you know, the technology that we have now, especially with VR and so forth, and also, you know, high definition graphics. Once again, we do have the ability to have that big spectacle, because that's why I love, you know, I do love superheroes, is to have those big exciting battles, or being able to put on Batman's gloves and walk around the Batcave as wearing VR and feel like John, maybe not jumping up on my bed.
I didn't do that. It was in the game. It was
I might do it with a VR headset on, just doing things like that, and things like that, because we have got to that point, and I think it has translated quite well, while movie characters on the other end don't translate well to games at all. I don't think there are many games.
Simon, I have a question. I'm confused. What do you mean Vision was white back then? Like Vision in the Wandavision's white. Is there a black one?
No, his suit, he was pure white. His suit was white. It was a weird, the late 80s were weird. They changed everyone. Like it was very strange.
I do think that it's possible to celebrate games like Arkham City and Arkham Asylum and whatnot, because they thankfully were made in the 2010s, right? Imagine if something like, say, I don't know, The Dark Knight, which really was, even though they're looking at Arkham Asylum, the comic book, as an inspiration, it was really The Dark Knight that they're really drawing inspiration from. But if The Dark Knight or something sophisticated like that came out in 1989, the kind of games that you'd get from that time weren't particularly great. You know, I remember playing that Batman game, and it's a famous glitch that you can't really pass the level without a lot of like hard work. But I don't know, maybe I'll write another letter to Amstrad one day. But my point being is that we're in a really special time where, even though arguably the culture is more entitled, it's because they know that a certain amount of profit can be made from these games. So therefore, I want to know it's going to be great. And there's a certain amount of technology that can benefit those games as well.
You have to get the right publisher. You have to get the right developer as well. If you give everything to EA or to Bethesda or someone, well, maybe so the big companies, they know they're just, once again, ticking boxes. We want to get microtransactions in there. We want to have a linear or a story quest that lasts 7 hours, turn it into live service so we can keep people coming back, rather than giving it to a dedicated team who love the property itself and understand, you know, the character, how they jump, swing, do whatever. Like the new Spider-Man on PS4, that was given to a smaller developer who knocked out of the park. Amazing game. And they've continued to do Miles Morales and so forth, and they will continue to do that as well.
Cool.
I think there's one aspect of the video game thing with superheroes, comic book video games, that always goes a bit unremarked upon, which is an interesting thing, because you just actually made me think of this, is that there are very few superheroes that reliably make good games. And the only one really is Spider-Man. But the only reason that is because all games have to have a core gameplay loop. They have to have a repeated thing that you do over and over again to make that game entertaining. Name a superhero whom you could impose a good gameplay loop upon.
This is amazing. I would say the most difficult character to do will probably be Superman, just because
Superman 64.
Yeah,
I was about to say the Superman video game sucked more than any other video game probably in history apart from E.T.
Exactly. He only works, exactly, good shout out. The only way that Superman works in the game is when you depower him and put him into a Mortal Kombat type 2D fighter. And even then, it plays with your head, because any kick from Batman into Harley Quinn is going to end her. So I just don't understand that shit. I just had to get that out of my system. Thank you. I do find that there was a great Hulk game.
I was going to say, Ultimate Destruction.
Played that so much. much. Like, fucking hell. Even when you've clocked the game, you're still smashing shit up. Like, you could just literally go to a town and just think, well, Bill Bixby's no longer around, so no one's going to stop me. I'm just going to do what I want. It's insane, that game. But I'd say that there's quite a few characters you could do, Ollie, but they can't be on the level of, say, Cosmic, and they can't be on the level of, say, a Superman type analog. So it can be done.
I mean, I think there's some of the Marvel Knights guys would be interesting, some more than others. Obviously, Moon Knight is the direct stand-in for Batman. But someone like Daredevil is an interesting choice. But then some of them, in a way, some of them are so good that to have to be a fallible human being controlling them doesn't really work. So I was thinking, actually, with the Avengers game we talked about, they're like, oh, you can be Captain America. I'm like, how's that going to work? Because it's basically just, you're going to beat guys up and then you're going to screw up throwing the shield and feel stupid. Or like, how are you going to be Hawkeye? How are you going to put 3 arrows in a guy? No, you're not. Like, it's going to look ridiculous. But then on the other hand, like Hulk always works, like Thor probably works if you're playing it as a sort of Devil May Cry type thing. But it's a tough call. It's hard to find the right source material for that.
Perhaps the truth of it is it depends on the game engine. As I said, if Superman is downscaled into a 2D fighter, then in your head it kind of makes a certain sense, even if I don't really particularly like that game. But if you were going to have, like, say, the Avengers game, or like, say, a Hulk game, as long as the game engine supports it in its own internal logic, because Hulk has never been able to jump as high as he can in that game. But because it's Hulk, you think, okay, cool, I'm going to jump a couple thousand miles into space and come back down. Not space, but you might as well be. But yeah, there's food for thought there.
I think there's always... Sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, the one thing I was going to round that out with is just the fact that I think if you look back historically, there are a lot of superhero games. It's just it's easier to create your own IP, your own characters to do that, rather than take on board existing ones. With things like Infamous.
I was going to say the Paragon system, not the Paragon system, the good and bad and evil system is really interesting with that one.
And there was a real-time strategy game which involved superheroes, and I've completely forgotten what it was called, and it was absolutely brilliant, and it'll bug me for the rest of the show. Anyway, carry on, John.
Do we have any closing thoughts? It could be a return to a particular subheading, or it could be what we've just been talking about in regards to games.
I mean, I had one on games, actually off the back of Ollie's point that I thought was quite interesting. The whole thing about, not playing Captain America because you might fuck up and it's not really like in the spirit of Captain America, stuff like that. I think it really touches on this idea of the thing that gaming as a medium brings to storytelling is putting the player in control of a character. And so the player the character you play becomes a stand-in for yourself to a certain degree. I think because of that, it's absolutely prime for a different kind of more nuanced storytelling, like a freaking Watchmen of games, where you deal with the cloudy gray area, or The Boys or something like that, where you tell a story that is not black and white, because the players playing these superheroes don't see in the same black and white that the superhero narrative gives you, in the mainstream at least.
Sure.
Definitely. And I think with following on from that, because you're able to have those, non-black and white stories in games, this has led you for studios to be more free to tell their movies and their TV programs in slightly less cutthroat ways, or black and white, like good people are good, bad people are bad, and so forth. Because you're seeing that with not necessarily superheroes, but I look at Jedis as my heroes, my superheroes. They're space wizards, fine, whatever. But in the end, they're now being deconstructed to a point where we're looking at them going, well, weren't they more like a hired mercenary force oppressing and blowing up millions of people on the Death Star and things like that? You're starting to you're starting to find that in the games they are playing that out much more when you're taking it from like Dark Force's point of view, which came out years and years and years ago, and other games like that, or Starkiller, who was in the Force Unleashed games as well.
Yeah,
you understand much more about what Darth Vader was doing between episodes 5 and 5 and 6 and so forth. So yeah, I just love that all of this is coming together now, and you have opportunities to do a lot more.
Sure.
I just want to end with this is Bernie Sanders and John Lennon on the cover of Rolling Stone. And for Wonder Woman, I want to see Wonder Woman 3 versus the space Nazis. That's my
Always in
that's
space.
for Wonder Woman 3 versus space Nazis with Baby Yoda.
My closing thoughts would be that even if you do have a really charismatic creator regarding films, and they come across you and they have this really good idea to create something like, say, Watchmen, they may be able to convince the executive producers to give them the money, but I don't know if that person should have that power if they don't understand the source material. I've talked about this before, but Zack Snyder thinks Rorschach is cool. That's a problem, you know.
Wait, who's Rorschach? John, who's Rorschach?
Rorschach is a character in Watchmen who he's got extreme far-right tendencies. He doesn't quite realize himself being a psychopath. It could be a problem for the community at large. He's very black and white, and he has a mask over his face, which is very much akin to the Rorschach test. The problem is that Zack Snyder doesn't realize that 14-year-old Zack Snyder may have thought he was cool, just like 14-year-old John Clay, but making a movie being of a certain age means you have to understand what Alan Moore is trying to do. Someone who splits a dog's head in half and thinks, yeah, now I know what I should be doing as a superhero, isn't someone that you should be filming in slow motion looking cool. And if you do so, then you have to make sure that the audience is aware of that being a meta-contextual device. But that's my closing thought, which is really far into the geek sphere. Anyone else?
I just want to ask a really quick question. Sorry. What do people think of the Snyder Cut coming out in a couple of months, and the fact that this has come about because of fan pressure?
I'm going to ask, what is Snyder Cut? What's this?
Oh, Snyder Cut, the Justice League, the new Justice League movie. So,
long story short, Zack Snyder is a director. He was booked to make the Justice League movie. He bailed out halfway through because of personal issues, and another guy, Joss Whedon, took it on.
Another guy, I know that guy.
Buffy.
Guy.
Yeah.
It was a disaster because it was art by committee, and all the fans figured if Zack Snyder got back in on it, it might be good. And after enough fan pressure, they decided, yeah, let's make this whole movie again. Let's cut new bits and let's change the plot, and then see if we can make it a decent film and release it only on streaming. So it's a bit of an anomaly. I think, to be honest with you, I think it's good. What's the worst that can happen? You know what I mean? Like,
I thought Josh Whedon would be
Superman. I'll go back for that.
See, like I thought Josh Whedon would be doing. I don't know. I always thought Josh Whedon was a very good writer. So what? I don't understand why did they just feel.
He didn't write it. I think that was the problem.
He came in very late on.
He came in to fix it, but he's good at fixing. He didn't fix it.
It's just a fucking mess. That's my story. But like, essentially, if you have a film, and you know, Zack Snyder had very good reasons why he couldn't carry on. Like his daughter died, right? Now, if Joss Whedon comes in and he delivers what he delivered, as messy as that was, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it's definitely something that we move on from. And ultimately, this is it. Like, if you're going to spend that much money on a film, I need to know that instead of it going to some kind of aid or some kind of research that benefits the planet, then it goes somewhere else. Because I know story is important. I wouldn't be a director otherwise. But I can't see the beneficial aspect of Zack Snyder's Snyder Cut, apart from it being pure and utter narcissism. So that's how I feel.
So let me get this straight. Josh Whedon, it's been released with Josh Whedon's edit on it.
Sort of.
They want to do another version of it with Snyder cutting it or refilming it entirely.
Zack Snyder had already shot around 90% of the movie already. And then his daughter died. So they brought in Whedon to finish it, and he lightened the tone, and he took out more slow-mo and things like that, and essentially finished it for the theatrical release. A lot of people were like, this doesn't seem like Zack Snyder. So over the last 4 years or however long, they've been pushing to say, release a Snyder Cut. WB relented, and essentially now in a couple of months, we're going to get a 4-hour director's cut, and it's the original director's cut as well.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. I like to, maybe two different things, two different versions.
And so that
I
loads
don't like
of
being
fan
invited
pressure.
to the mortuary to check out a corpse. That's what it feels like to me. But hey,
I think I can't judge it until I see it.
I don't want to have to judge it beforehand, knowing how I am sensibility-wise. But I don't necessarily think that spending this much money on what they're actually outlining it to be is a good use of adventure or investigation. So the general concept for me is enough for it to really push me into what I normally don't do, is to judge something before I've seen it. I wish they could have given the money to some other project. It just didn't need to happen.
I mean, in my view, it's the problem really comes down to how you find this line between the auteur and the financier, right? Because on one side of it, I would argue quite a lot of the time the director's cuts don't actually bring a whole lot to a film, and in some cases actually damage the original, the original piece in some ways. But then on the other side of the whole thing, and the thing that we see a lot more popular now, is that the studio has like an iron fist, doesn't understand the vision, they just want the paycheck. And so you need to find this line where you're allowing the original director to execute on their vision, but also not giving them George Lucas free reign levels of just whatever's in your head, just put it out there. Because
don't do that, man. We get Jar Jar Winks or whatever.
Matt, you're so right. And you know what it really says? It says that if there's going to be a big difference between how Warner Brothers does things and how Marvel under Disney does things, they are now in a position where fans of a comic book entity can actually get something done in a really negative way because they want it all. And we know from what he's saying, they've shot new scenes and they're getting other stuff together, but it's not necessarily going to be something that looks like it's finished in certain areas, right? Certain parts of it is going to look pretty much like this is the concept. And that's going to be your going in mindset. That's not an experience where you can totally lose yourself in the plot. You're going to be trying to look for stuff which doesn't look right. That isn't a true experience, whereas this would never have happened if Kevin Feige was told, hey, we really, really liked what you brought out, but we want you to bring it out again the way we want it. They would never have let that come to light because they got control. They have much more awareness of quality control and what it does for your long-term viewership.
I'm just saying.
Sorry, I was going to say, could the pointing out of weird things that aren't supposed to be there be any weirder than Henry Cavill's not mustache? Just saying.
Yeah, that's true.
Are they going to do something about that? As far as I'm concerned, that they're going to have to do something about that thing, because it's only going to become a meme in pop culture again. I mean, I don't know what else they could do to make it look more realistic, because I mean, how do you get rid of a mustache and a moving face?
They're gonna remove that scene because that scene was added in afterwards.
Well, how many other scenes is he in? He can't. Superman.
No, so it was because they brought him back for reshoots when Whedon came back in, that he had the mustache for Mission Impossible 6. And so they had to do the editing. So what they'll do now is they'll just remove that scene and those particular scenes and go with the original scenes now, and just put them back into the movie. I'm
confused. You're saying they're going to have other scenes where Henry Cavill didn't have a mustache? He always had it for the shoots.
No, he didn't have one when they originally filmed the movie. A lot of that was left on the cutting room floor when Whedon came in.
Oh, God. I don't know if I want to know much about this cadaver. I'm sorry. You're a good person, Simon. I feel like I'm wasting your time. Let's now basically end this whole thing. Do you guys feel satiated with our conversation?
I do, yeah.
Excellent. Let people know what it is you're doing. Ola, what are you up to when you're not talking to me?
Well, I have a radio show because mainstream radio sucks and good music has no boundaries. That's why I have it, and you can check it out on Mixcloud Old School Kitchen.
Fantastic. Ollie, what are you doing when you're not talking to myself and Ola?
When I'm not unwelcomely bringing up Henry Cavill's mustache, I'm a music producer. And when it's not the apocalypse, I'm also a musician. But at the moment, you can find me working for a band called Georgia, a band called Barbarilla's Bang Bang.
Yay!
And I think lately, Taxi Joe, who you should check out. They're very, very cool.
Fan-fucking-tastic. Simon Mitchell, when you're not talking to me, Ollie, and Ola, what the hell are you doing?
I am currently down by the Hastings coast, really enjoying the beach at the moment, and currently helping my friend get his first short movie out. So that's what we're looking to do.
Very intriguing. What's the movie about? Are you allowed to say?
I sent it to you.
I'm a fucker. When did you send it?
No, I sent you the trailer. It's just a short documentary, but we're trying to do some other bits and pieces. But once we know more, I will do it.
Mate, don't let me off the hook. When did you send it to me?
Let's say 2020, but I know a lot of things are going on there.
Embarrassing. All right, let me just basically introduce Matt again, and then I'm going to just run away and check out this trailer. What are you doing when you're not basically talking to me, Simon, Ollie, and Ola?
Yeah, I'm Matt Gaffen. When I'm not doing this, I am in a loud, shouty punk band, which obviously isn't playing due to COVID, but we're getting ready to release our next single at the moment, just kind of getting everything together.
Okay, fantastic. People of the RANTBOX TV universe, thank you for joining us. We will return to this topic and cover such things as literary fiction, radio plays, theatre, musicals, and internet-based web plays. So that's going to be quite meaty. I hope to see you there. A new episode of RANTBOX TV is uploaded weekly on Fridays by 12:30 p.m. noon when I am finally out of bed. Do hit like and subscribe for more, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Next week's episode will be with Nishant Joshi, who is the bassist of the Palpitations. He's an NHS worker who, alongside his wife, was one of the very first to alert the press to the government's questionable attitude to PPE for his staff in hospitals and across the nation. Subsequent legal measures were put into action, let alone numerous media interests from Channel 4, Vogue magazine, and earlier videos from myself, John Clay. So thank you for subscribing, and see you next Friday. Goodbye.
Cool.